Hello, this is Mateus from We Hack Purple. Thank you very much for joining us today. With me today, we have Jeff from Contrast Security, and we are going to be going over their new serverless tool that helps you scan without having to worry too much. I had a write-up for Jeff, and it is a mile long. This man has done everything on the planet and more, founded everything, made everything, and on top of that, he's just generally a really good guy. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Williams, the myth, the man, the
Thanks,
legend.
Mateus. I appreciate that. I'm excited to talk to you about Contrast today and show you serverless and get right into it.
All right, sweet. Let's dive right into the deep end. My first question for you, we're just going to do a little bit of chit chat and then we'll get into the demo. I'm just curious to know if you could tell us a bit about your product and what makes it different from other things on the market right now.
Yeah, so Contrast is a platform of products. So we try to provide everything that you would need in order to add automation to an application security program. Our array of products is a little different than what you'll find from other vendors. So, instead of sort of the traditional SAST, DAST, SCA, WAF kind of lineup, our platform is built from like the most modern tools available. So we focus on IAST and sort of dynamic SCA that happens at runtime. We have a serverless tool that I'm going to show you today. And then we also have a very modern static analysis tool that's we call pipeline native. So you get kind of a different set of tools in the platform that we think are much more effective at building an AppSec program. I can't hear you.
There we go. I'm really diligent about a mute button. So I'm just curious to know, what have your users found so far to be the most helpful about the product? I know it's kind of new and you'd probably have some relatively new feedback, but yeah, what have users really liked?
Well, one of the big things, one of our philosophies is that you really need to analyze an application from the inside out. And we do that with IAST. We get right inside the running application and we directly measure security with the full context. We do that with our SCA tool. We watch the applications it runs. So you don't just see what libraries are in your source code repo, you see what libraries are actually in use in the real running application and what parts of the libraries are being used and which libraries aren't used at all. And in serverless context, we think it's really important to not just do a static scan of the serverless code, because you can only get a sort of a pinhole window, like the keyhole look at what's going on there. Instead, we install right into your AWS environment, and we can see, all the functions as well as all the context, and we watch the serverless functions run and get just a huge amount of context around what's really vulnerable in that environment. So our customers have really liked two things about our serverless product. One is that it's super fast to install. It just, it's like 3 clicks, and I'll show you this in just a second, and install it into your AWS environment, and then it just runs forever. Whenever you make a change to your serverless environment, it'll, Contrast will automatically detect that change and rescan just the piece that needs to be rescanned. And then, so that's just, getting it up and running is really easy. But the other thing that they really like is the 3 kinds of analysis that it does on your serverless functions. So it analyzes all your serverless functions, the code for the serverless functions for vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of products out there that'll, scan a container or, look at your config. But to me, that's not really serverless security. Serverless security to me is like, let's look at the code of the serverless function and make sure it's not doing dangerous things. So that's one thing that we test for. We also analyze all the libraries that you use in your serverless functions. So we get that dependency analysis. And then we analyze your serverless functions for the IAM permissions that they're using to make sure they're not using too much permission. If we can scale those back, or if they're exposed in a way that they shouldn't be, then we can warn you about those permission issues that are so critical in that serverless environment.
Wow. That sounds like it does everything. I especially like hearing about the library components. The number of times libraries are out of date and have the vulnerabilities, and people just have kind of gapped on what to check and such is just countless. And so that can be
Well, I'll
like,
say this about that is, I think you should always analyze the code of your application and the libraries associated with your application together. In the
mhm.
market, there's a lot of products that do one or the other thing, but really, in order to really understand security, you've got to analyze it when it's all put together, because understanding the code vulnerabilities requires you to understand a lot about how the libraries are being used, and vice versa. If you want to understand what library vulnerabilities are there, you have to understand how the code uses those libraries. So it's really one thing, and it's artificially split in the market, but don't let your vendor tell you that's two separate products. It's one analysis.
Jeff, you just gave me the best soundbite for later production. That was perfect. You're right. They shouldn't be separate. They should be, and to say they're artificially separated, point on. Oh man. As the audience can probably tell, Jeff really likes talking about security. And so I'm curious to know, our next question is, what have you liked about this product the most? Like what really like just gets you fired up about this product?
Well, to me, the coolest thing about serverless is that the rate at which it's being adopted by our customers and just the world in general. This is a major shift in computing. I think like the first big shift was like from desktop applications to web apps, and that dominated the market for 20 years basically. But we're in the midst of another shift, which is moving to APIs and frankly serverless deployments of those APIs is huge. I found this out recently. AWS spends one half of their marketing budget on serverless. Not all the other stuff that Amazon does. Half their budget is spent on serverless because they think it's so important. And really, it is. It's an incredibly fast way to deploy business logic and get it accessible and up and running. It's the amount of power that you have is just astounding. So I'm convinced this is the future of computing, and we're going to see it everywhere. I think something like 25% of developers are using serverless technology now, or I guess they will be by next year. And it's just growing incredibly fast. So that's what gets me excited is the promise of bringing better application security to all those developers so that I wrote the OS Top 10 in 2002, and it really hasn't changed very much in the last 19 years. And so I'm always looking for opportunities to make big changes in the way that we secure our code. And I think this is, a huge step that can push us in the right direction. I suppose it has potential to push us the wrong direction too. So that's why we're here.
So I had a chit chat with Tanya yesterday about serverless because I was just trying to get my head around it. I do the operations
Yeah.
here at We Act Purple and such, and my understanding about why serverless is going to be so potent is that it substantially reduces bills and also it just reduces your attack surface. Can we just take a moment for people who might not be familiar with serverless, and you can just kind of give a quick definition or rundown because you obviously
Yeah,
feel very
sure.
passionate about it.
Yeah, I mean, the basic idea is that you can get away from running all the infrastructure that you have to do to make code available in production. If you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you would go get a piece of hardware and you'd run an operating system on that, and you'd probably add Java or .NET on top of that, and then you'd add uh, a framework and some libraries and some custom code, and you'd spin all that stuff up and you'd manage it and maintain it. Well, with serverless, it's really just, Amazon takes care of all of that stuff, and you just add your little custom code, like just the code to one function, and they take care of running it, scaling it, managing it, sessions, everything. And you can focus on what you're good at, like the code for your business. Now, you said reducing the attack surface. I would probably change the way I'd phrase that. Like if you think about a monolithic application, it's got all those endpoints built into one big app. With serverless, you're breaking that application up into a whole bunch of little pieces. So it's not necessarily that there's less attack surface, but it is fragmented into a whole bunch of little pieces. And actually, that's kind of one of the challenges with serverless is understanding how all those little pieces are configured, how they connect to each other. And I'm going to show you some tools in a minute for how you can get your arms around that and understand what it's doing from a security perspective.
Okay, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like I said, I'm not the techie, so yeah. You've mentioned AWS a lot, and so I'm gonna ask, like, right now, does it only work with AWS, or is that going to be a forever thing? What's the plans there?
Yeah, no, we just started with AWS because that's they're sort of the dominant platform for serverless right now. But Azure Functions and maybe even Google Cloud are coming along. They're all offering serverless kind of capability. So we will be bringing our serverless product to those environments as well.
Of course, you got to go where it makes the most amount of sense and where the most market share is, right?
Yep, exactly right. Can't do
Okay.
everything.
And we always like to ask for our community members and those who follow us. Our number one thing we'd like to ask is there a trial version available, or is there something in the works, or something that people can play around with, I guess?
That's a great question. We just launched this. We make all of our products available through the Contrast Community Edition, which you can get yourself an account on. You can try our IAST and our RASP and our software composition analysis and everything there. I don't think serverless is available there yet because we really did just launch this about a month ago. So give us a minute. We'll add serverless there, and then you can try it out on your own serverless environments. If in the meantime, give us a call. Give me a call. We'd be happy to show it to you. We're super proud of it. So we'd love to set up a demo for you and a trial and whatever you need to get going.
Super easy to find for those of you who are watching. I navigated your website. It's just so easy. Some vendors, they tend to make their website like a labyrinth, and they're like, okay, you've made it through. We'll give you a demo now. And so it's very easy to find. So that's kind of the questions for now about the product. And are you ready to give it a rip and show our audience what it's all about?
Let's get rid of the marketing slide and let's just take a look at Contrast. So this is our main dashboard. I just thought I'd start with this just so you can see, like, I'm currently monitoring 28 applications. And when I say monitoring, I really do mean monitoring. Contrast products are continuous. It's not like you go, scan through all of your applications serially. Instead, Contrast is running on all of them in parallel and gathering data in this our central console. So I can just see at a very quick glance, I've got a range of scores here. I'm analyzing custom code and libraries. We report something called route coverage, which is cool. I'll demonstrate that in a future demonstration. This one's focused on serverless, but I just wanted to give you a sense. And so I'm going to show you the serverless product here. But let's start with just some of your viewers may not have ever seen a serverless environment before. So I just thought what I'd do is take them through AWS serverless environment for a second. So here, this is an application repository. If you want to try serverless, you can spin up any of these applications yourself real easy. Like there's Hello World applications. I'm going to start one here that's called DVSA, Damn Vulnerable Security Serverless Application. And it's an OWASP project, which is really cool. And I'm just clicking through into this, and you can see, it's a deliberately vulnerable app made to help serverless security folks learn about serverless. So this is the details. And if you go down to the bottom of the page here, you can say, I acknowledge that this code does some dangerous things, which it has to. And then you can just hit deploy. And it takes a couple of minutes to deploy, but basically it's just instantiating this app in your environment and all the serverless functions that are part of it, which I've done already, fortunately. So if I go to my applications tab here, you can see I've got this, this serverless repo here for OWASP DVSA. And here I can see all the different functions that are part of this application and resources and things. So you can see like it's much more fragmented than a traditional application. It's all these little pieces like get orders and get receipt and shell function and all these things. We'll dig into these in just a second. But I just wanted to show you kind of what it looks like to get started with one. And this application's now up and running. Like you can do it in a minute. So the next thing I want to do here is just go to the serverless tab in contract. Actually, well, let's add that app. So I'll walk you through that process. Like here's what you would need to do to add that app to contrast. So we support kind of three ways of analyzing apps. A live application is like a web application running on an app server, sort of traditional thing, maybe APIs that running that way, running in a container, anything like that. Local files, if you want to statically scan some code, you can do that here as well with a scan project. And for serverless, this is the easiest thing to install is we're just going to connect our AWS account. So when I hit next here, it's going to bring up a template for me. And it's going to say, hey, Contrast wants to inventory your functions. It wants to do a scan. And I checked off the custom code vulnerabilities because that's a cool thing to scan for. I can just put in my AWS account number here, and I'll just fake one here. But if I hit create new stack, that installs Contrast in your serverless environment. And rather than stall for 2 minutes while it does that, it really does take just 2 minutes. I'll just show you my CloudFormation environment, and you can see I've got Contrast installed in my environment. And by installing the tool directly in your serverless environment, it's kind of scanning from the inside out, right? This Contrast serverless function now has the ability to scan the local environment. It can see all your S3 buckets and your serverless functions and your data, your DynamoDBs and everything that's here. It can see it and analyze the security of it locally. And that's why we get such good findings, is because we have all the context to make the right decision. So if I just installed it, the next thing that I would do is go to my serverless tab here and see that Contrast would automatically identify all the functions. So here you can see we're kind of mirroring what we just saw in AWS. And again, this appears in about a minute after you install Contrast. So we'll see all these different functions. And if I change one of these functions, it'll rescan it. So, if I go into the console here for this function, and I make a change to this code and redeploy it, let me do something innocuous here. And deploy this. In the background, Contrast is going to detect that change and start scanning it. So hopefully in a minute, we'll start to see a new scan that starts here under the scans tab. You'll just see a new scan start running on that one function.
So, like I said, I'm not the techie. This live scanning, does it come with any penalties, any delays, slowing down your system?
No. One of the beauties of testing from within the local environment, we're not testing from like a scan server somewhere in the, in somebody else's data center. We're scanning like right from within the local environment. So there's really no penalty for the cost of doing these scans is trivial because we're just making queries through local APIs and things like that. We're not sending any traffic across the internet. Make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Now we're analyzing these applications in a bunch of different ways. So I'm going to pull up the let me just show, if I click into one of these functions, what Contrast found here. So I'll just click into this admin shell function, which sounds kind of dangerous. And you can see here's what Contrast has discovered about this so far. You can see, this is a node application. You can see the account number, and if you click on this, it'll take you right to the code of the function so that you can fix the problem. And you see we found 3 results here. We found a code injection problem, some least privilege problems, and another code problem, a local file inclusion. And we gather all the data. This is just kind of the metadata about this function. You can see, hey, we've got a bunch of different permissions. We've got a bunch of different accesses here. Looks like a lot, right? So that's kind of dangerous, particularly in a function that's got this code injection problem. You don't want to see an overprivileged function with a code injection problem. That's really dangerous. And we give you this, the overall score here, so you can see, kind of how this breaks down in terms of vulnerabilities and accessibility. When you multiply those together, essentially, like it's really vulnerable and it's got a lot of power. That's when you've got a really dangerous function.
Is that chart system based on like 100 is you're doing awesome, or 100 is like something's on fire?
This is 100 means you're doing awesome. And so the security is relatively low here for some of these things. And it's publicly accessible, right? Like, so we'll look at that in just a second. So let's go to the results here. And here you can see our scan initiated for that when we just changed the function code. Scan kicked off, so it's just doing its thing in the background. It'll tell us in a minute if it has vulnerabilities. So here's a list of the results from all the different kinds of analysis that we do on this application. So you can see a number of different kinds of vulnerabilities here. And I'm going to filter this down. You can search for dependencies. These are, libraries used by this serverless function that do something dangerous. They're either out of date or they have known vulnerabilities. So Contrast analyzes those, and here's this node serialized library that we're using in one of our functions has a pretty serious vulnerability from 2017. You can see it takes if it takes untrusted data, then that can be exploited to achieve arbitrary code execution. So that's kind of dangerous. And again, Contrast just analyzes this and shows you exactly what libraries you have. You can see, fortunately, they're all in the same function, which is kind of cool. Now I know I can go one place and update my functions here. Let's filter it down on just the exploits. Now these are custom code vulnerabilities, and we'll take a look at some of these. You can see, code injection, SQL injection, local file inclusion. Really, serverless functions can have almost all the traditional kinds of vulnerabilities that you would read about in the OS Top 10. There is a serverless OS Top 10, but it covers the same basic stuff: authentication, access control, injection, weak encryption. All those kinds of things are generally all applicable to serverless apps. So, here we can dig in. Let's look at this code injection vulnerability that we were talking about before. So what Contrast did here was Contrast actually directly accessed this function. It tested the function, and in fact, it verifies that this was exploitable by analyzing the output in the AWS environment. So we look for evidence that the exploit actually worked. Here you can see we passed in a console.log command with a large number here. And you can see this payload ended up, and we detected that in the log itself. So we know that this is exploitable because we did it. That's really powerful evidence that this is something you need to fix.
So one thing I've heard you say quite a bit about is the fact that you deploy inside of your environment. And a lot of other apps will scan from the outside. I don't know about this example, but are there examples like this that couldn't be found because most of another product will be on the outside, whereas yours is deployed inside?
Yeah, I mean, one of the traditional problems with both SAST and DAST really is that it's difficult to tell if something is actually exploitable, right? SAST can't really tell because the code's not running. You're just testing a model of the application, and you don't really know if what you found is true. And if you look at SAST results, you'll see tons of false positives. DAST has a similar problem because all DAST can see is an HTTP request that they send in with an attack in it, and then they get a response back. They don't really know what happened inside the application. Now, sometimes they use a bunch of tricks, like they'll try and exploit a function that, say, causes a delay in the response time. So they'll detect, hey, this is susceptible to SQL injection because I was able to wait for 5 seconds before the response came back. and I know I caused that effect, so I know I exploited it. But there's a lot of vulnerabilities where you can't really detect that they were exploited. If all you get back is a 500 error, what happened? Did it just break, or did it actually exploit the thing? So because we're kind of in the deployment environment, we're able to test those things directly. So if we test an exploit here, like, hey, let's see if we can write something to the log. Okay, well, we can just test the log. You can't do that with DAST or SAST. So it's a powerful technique for verifying that something's really exploitable.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah. So this is the vulnerability detection capability here. And there's some aspects of both static and dynamic analysis that we're doing here to verify that these things are really exploitable. We also detect the use of secrets like AWS keys and so on. If that ever shows up in your code or config, we'll detect that. I don't have any of these here in this environment, but you can imagine that showing keys here would be a bad idea. And then the last thing is the permission analysis. And this is really unique. I think this is really a cool capability, is we analyze the permissions that are assigned to each one of these AWS functions to see whether they're over permissioned or they've got extra access. Let's take a look at one of these. I'll look at let's look at the admin shell one here. And you can see Contrast detected that a number of permissions for this Lambda ought to be removed. So there's a whole bunch of unused permissions. This is, this function was assigned a lot of permission that it doesn't need. And so, principal, least privilege and all that, we want, we don't want over permission functions. So we've got this huge list of stuff to get rid of. There's also, problems with wildcards and some other issues that we can detect here. Let's look at the there's two violating policies here, right? The first one is the Dynamo full access. And when we look at that, let's look at the violating policy first. You can see this function is deployed with this Amazon DB full access. And look at all the permissions it gets. And they're wildcarded like Dynamo star, DAX star. All these policies are granted to this function, and almost none of them are used. And it applies to sort of everything, right? So this is pretty clearly a massively overpowered function. So then when Contrast sees that, we'll propose a new policy for that. And you can just cut and paste this right into your environment. We give it to you in JSON and YAML and Terraform, depending on how you're deploying your application. But like you can see, this is the whole policy as it should be. You saw that huge amount of code up here. This is what it really should be. All it needs is DynamoDB get item.
That is super wild because we did some pre-talking and you never mentioned this part. And this is just this massive time saver. It might not be perfect every time, but at least it's getting you to that right spot. And that is super cool.
We have a number of customers using this already. Some really cool ones, like I don't want to say that, like a power tool vendor. And you wouldn't think power tools, what do they do why do they need serverless functions? But actually all the modern power tools, they are API driven. They're connected to the net. They're sharing telemetry with serverless functions. So, it's really incredibly powerful. And, they've got thousands of serverless functions. So, very quickly, these things can multiply into a big unmanageable pile of code. And so we're trying to reestablish some order. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second.
Sounds like herding cats. And cats that you didn't even know you had and you forgot you had and that don't have bells on them. It's a whole new beast.
It's like any new technology. It solves a lot of problems, but it introduces some as well. And so, the new challenge is going to be around some of the things we're talking about here today. I'll show you this other one. This is another policy, similar example. Let's view the violating policy. Here, we've got a bunch of IAM permissions and a bunch of Lambda permissions and so on. And again, the replacement policy is delete this one. You don't need it. Which is kind of cool, right? We'll just turn that off. I think that's probably the best thing security people can do is just like, hey, you got something you don't need. Let's just shut that down. So those are the 4 kinds of analysis that we're doing here: dependencies, custom code vulnerabilities, secret analysis, and then permission analysis. And for any of these, I think it's cool. You can just go right into the function. You can click, right in and see. If I want to view this in the AWS console, I can just pull it up. I can make that change, right here in the configuration, change the permissions and so on. Right. So really makes it easy to just get the right fix in the right place. So we're super excited about it. And then once you make the change, guess what happens?
Another scan.
Exactly. And so then we'll update our dashboard here. You'll go back to your list of, here's the scans. You'll see the scan in progress as you change things. Here's that one function we just changed. It's already rescanned. And, then your results will just be better if you fix some things. So you can work these off pretty quickly and then retest and verify that you're done. It's not going to take weeks or months to complete this feedback loop. And really, that feedback loop is the key to DevSecOps, is getting that super tight feedback loop that a developer can just do themselves without having to bring in experts, without having to wait days or weeks for the PDF file to come down from the static tool or whatever. Like, this is a really much more effective way to work.
On the note of devs, I also kind of related. I just want to say, I always like a nice, clean user interface, and your user interface is like really simple. Like, I'm not a dev, I'm not like making code, and like it strikes me as something that I could use. And then on top of that, the fact that it sounds like you've made it dev focused. Like, it's so easy to like just like either replace that code, fix these things, and like do it on the fly and not have to wait for that feedback loop from the security team, and frees up their resources. So yeah, good job on the user interface.
I really appreciate that. We put a lot of work into it, but I will say this about that, is that probably a lot of developers on this call are like, man, I don't need another dashboard. I've already got like 50 dashboards. So everything, in contrast, is API driven. So for example, if, let's say you just want some high level data about your overall portfolio, you can do that from contrast. I can filter this down and say, oh, I just want to see the TPS division. I want to see critical and high vulnerabilities in Java applications. Okay. So now here's my new updated dashboard, which is cool. But if I want to pull that new filtered view now into my dashboard that I care about, we'll give you the curl right here. Right. So if I want to know about the overall application scores, if I want to know about routes, I can get that data. But like, I can just actually, I can just hit this copy button and pull up a terminal and just execute that curl to just pull in the data about how many apps I have in each score category and so on. So everything, in contrast, is API driven. And then we've got a ton of different integrations into all the different tools you're probably using. So, this data that I've showed you.
I was going to ask about integrations.
Yeah, so we've got a whole bunch. Like, we actually don't really want you to be relying on the dashboard as your primary interface to contrast. Like, we would rather you consume this data through your IDE or through Jira or boards or whatever you use. Maybe it's in your CI/CD pipeline because you want to fail the build if it's got critical vulnerabilities. Maybe it's through Slack. Really depends on how you do your work, and everybody's process is different. So we try to just say, hey, look, we've got all these integrations. You can consume our data that way, or you can easily build your own. And a number of our customers, like Comcast, for instance, builds their own dashboard. And they've got multiple tools, including Contrast, putting data into their dashboard. So back to serverless.
Let's do it.
All right, so there's one last thing I wanted to show is our graph. So this is a really powerful view for folks building serverless applications. The idea here is, and let me just refresh my view here because we rescanned. So what we want to build is a view that shows all the different pieces and how they all fit together. So if I look at my environment here, this is really what my serverless environment looks like. And what I like to do with this picture, I mean, you can click around and you can see what each different piece connects to, which is kind of fun and interesting. Like you can see, like almost everybody logs stuff. Okay, that makes sense. All my functions are doing some logging. You can even group this by service. So you can see, hey, here's how all these pieces, let me close this. Here's how all these pieces fit together. And when I always put my lambdas in the middle, so you can kind of, let's see how that goes. I'm trying to move this box here. It's kind of hidden. Let me zoom in.
That one guy's causing a problem. There you go.
Yeah, right. So here you can see kind of how all the pieces fit together. And I like to actually look at, this is my, my functions, right? My API, exposed APIs here. And so I like to click through these and look and see like, hey, you know, a number of these are really vulnerable. So when I look at, you know, these things are public, some of them are accessible, some of them are both public and accessible. And those make for some really interesting queries. So like if I double click into one of these, I can see this one is both public and accessible. So it's publicly accessible, it doesn't require authentication. That's a little dangerous. And then you can see kind of, you know, all the information about that. When I ungroup these, I like to kind of follow some of the paths around here. Like, so if I choose some of these unprotected functions, I'll pull them out so we can see them out here a little bit. You can see, oh, this is the one I was just looking at. This is posting an order. You can see, you know, maybe you should have to authenticate before you post an order, right? You can see here, this one is grab an S3 bucket. The idea here is you can really see, like from the gateway, you can see which lambdas are invoked. Like, so for instance, this function is, you know, unauthenticated, unprotected, and it calls this lambda. It actually calls two things. It's this other one too here. It calls these two things, neither of which has a very good security score. So what we're looking for is, you know, hey, here's an exposed endpoint that calls a serverless function that's way over permissioned, right? And you start putting these things together and you start to say like, hey, these are things that I really ought to take a look at, right? And so, you know, we're looking for kind of ways that an attacker might come in through this graph and exploit your serverless functions.
Neat. That's like looks like a mix of, well, inventory like is always a big thing in any organization, and like this lets you see what's going on, but also I guess like this could be used for like some threat modeling and finding out like where people are possibly going to get in.
That's exactly right. You know, you probably have some policies that you want to enforce on this. Like, hey, we don't want any public-facing serverless functions that don't require authentication. Well, you can filter down. You can see exactly that subset of things. And, you know, earlier we talked about like, you know, there's, you know, just in a simple serverless app like damn vulnerable serverless app, there's like, you know, 300 pieces here. That's a lot to keep track of. So you really want to leverage your automation to make sure you can get your hands around that perimeter and, you know, understand what you got, and then make sure that it's all, you know, new things are going to come online. So you want to make sure any new things conform to your policies. Any questions on any of that?
No, that looks like just to be able to like on top of that to have a visual interface instead of like a database log readout can sometimes give people something to like play with and identify things a lot easier. So that's really wild. Like it's got a few different functions in it.
I'll show you just like there's not a lot of settings to this, right? Like we didn't have to configure a lot of stuff and tune and tailor a lot of stuff. You can sort of turn on what rules you want to apply, and you can filter down if there's like, let's say I want to exclude any functions where the name starts with, you know, Jeff or something. I can create little filters to exclude some things from certain analysis because you know you may have good reasons for doing that kind of
as you have to do in every tool. So like you have to make
Yeah,
exceptions.
but we've made it kind of easy. And then of course, this isn't limited to just our serverless product, but the platform comes with all the kind of enterprise kind of features and functions that you'd expect, like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, SAML integration, logging, access, role-based access control, so that you probably don't want every developer being able to see the results for every one of your serverless apps, right? So you can just focus their visibility in on the things that they need to see. All kinds of settings like that. Like we want to really change the way people manage AppSec policy to doing it centrally. So you'll define a policy and then apply it to this set of apps and another policy for this other set of apps, and manage that all centrally.
I'm not too sure if I'm asking the right question, but does this at all work with, because especially I think about the rescanning all the time, does this work with like a SIM, like a security incident tool?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, certainly you can pull this data into a SIM. Generally people take vulnerability data and put it into a vulnerability and risk management kind of product. Like maybe they put it into Kenna or ThreatFix or one of those kind of products. Many organizations have a custom risk register where all that kind of stuff goes, and certainly we can do that. Most of our SIM integration comes with our Protect product that protects applications in production, where we're detecting attacks and reporting threat intelligence and attack telemetry into the SIM. That's really more where those integrations come.
Gotcha. That's what I
But
was thinking.
yeah, yeah. So it's kind of different group of people that do that kind of job. But with that, I will say, the ideal way of doing AppSec is to not put vulnerability data into a vulnerability repo, because that's kind of an anti-pattern, actually. And I just talked to somebody this morning who's got millions of vulnerabilities in their vulnerability tracking system. Tons of them are not triaged. They really don't know what they have in there. It's just stuff they haven't gotten to yet. And I think it's much healthier to get accurate feedback back to developers fast, so they can fix these problems as part of their normal workflow before they get checked in, before they become a vulnerability that you need to risk grade and track and retest and redeploy. And I mean, it's really an expensive process if you let it become a quote vulnerability. If it's just a bug that you're working on while you're working on your code, then great. It doesn't slow down the process nearly as much. So anyway, look, that's what I wanted to show you about our serverless product. We've tried to make it really easy for any developer to get started with serverless security. You can just 3 clicks, add it to your environment. From that point forward, Contrast will constantly monitor all of your functions and resources in your AWS environment and let you know if there's anything that you need to tune for security. We showed you examples of custom code vulnerabilities, library vulnerabilities, permissions problems, and hard-coded secrets. Contrast will identify all of that stuff for you. And this is, it's quite a powerful set of analyses that we do on your serverless app. So I think it's, it's a little different than just kind of hardening your container. We're really focused on like the code that goes in those environments and the actual security vulnerabilities and the business logic of your apps.
We still have a little bit of time left. I'm just curious to know if there's like any additional or mainly advanced features that you might want to highlight for, I guess, some of the power users out there. So far, everything's been great. Like just as like a layman, like I feel like I could use this tool. Maybe not understand it, but at least use it. Is there anything like advanced that you like want to flex on?
No, actually, like it really is. I mean, look, you can drive all this stuff from your scripts, and you can integrate this into your CI/CD pipelines and all that stuff. But like the core engine, it really just works. Like you add it to your AWS environment and then it goes to work and just does the job for you. There's not a whole bunch of things that you need to go write custom rules or craft custom tailoring and things like that. It just doesn't work that way. And it's because of the way that serverless works that we're able to do this. We're able to install right into the environment and do our analysis from the inside.
That is pretty wild. I feel like I learned a lot. I think that's it. Anything you want to part with? I will make sure that we have some links to your site and likes.
No, I mean, please, I'd love to work with you to show this to you on your serverless applications as you're going forward. Just give me a shout and connect to me on LinkedIn. I do a lot there, and we'll get you hooked up.
All right. And does this product come as a standalone, or is this part of your entire platform?
Oh, yeah. So that's worth explaining a little bit. So there are those 5 products that I showed in the Contrast platform, and you can buy them individually. Generally, we bundle OSS with our other products. So it comes automatically with Assess and Scan and Serverless, all the kind of pre-prod things, because we think it's important to analyze libraries along with doing the code. But yeah, you can buy Assess separately, and a lot of people buy Assess and Protect. OSS comes with it, and then they use Scan and Serverless as on those environments as needed. But I think really we're trying to provide the whole platform as like all the tools that you would need to secure a whole enterprise portfolio full of applications. And we've put a real premium on accuracy and scalability. And I'll talk for a second about why that's so important. Like, accuracy is absolutely critical in these tools, because if you're not accurate, then you have to have experts involved to clean up the mess, right? Like whether it's a false positive, which you need to go rule out, or a false negative where your tool actually missed something that's real, you need experts to resolve both of those situations. And so, that's why we founded Contrast, was frustration with traditional AppSec tools because they were so inaccurate. And so, one of the things that we do is by making it accurate, we can create these tight feedback loops to developers so they can fix their own stuff. And like really, it changes the nature of your AppSec program. It becomes much more DevSecOps oriented. People might call it shift left. I'm not a huge fan of that term, but like that's the idea. And I'm not a huge fan because you also need to shift right. And that's what this runtime protection piece is about. But I was saying accuracy and scalability. The other thing is it has to scale. And, if scans require experts and take hours to run, it can't scale. Like there's no way to take that to a portfolio of hundreds or thousands of applications because it's just too much bottleneck from a security team. So, one of the things that Contrast did was say, hey, we're going to make this a distributed solution. So when you deploy Contrast Assess or OSS or Protect or Scan, we deploy with the application itself, as opposed to being like a central scan server kind of deployment. It deploys out with the application. And that has 2 advantages. It lets us get inside the running app so we can be really accurate. And it allows this distributed approach. So we can scan thousands or tens of thousands of applications in parallel and report all that data in continuously. So, that's just, and the serverless project's exactly the same, right? We can run on any number of serverless apps because it's actually, we're in your environment running as part of your infrastructure. And so, we're not limited by having a central kind of architecture.
I understand what you mean. I've read a fair amount of articles and then talked to people on Twitter. It's like you buy the tool, you do the scans, and then you're like, oh, look at all these things that are on fire. And now it's like, well, who's going to fix it? right? That's why when I see that you got those code snippets ready to like with the solution, it's such a massive time saver because you're just not like, okay, this is on fire now. I need to like go Google the solution or go talk to like the
Yeah.
Java expert. It's like there's at least like a recommended solution here, and that's one thing that you don't understand. And then you, like you said, you scale that more products, more products, more products that you got to scan and check for, and then you need more people to fix it, and so that accuracy really is a time saver, and so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I could think of some metaphors where it's what's the expression? Penny wise, pound foolish.
Yeah.
Right? I've done that to myself on like some home renovations. So you just need to think about is this really that expensive? So that's like really wild to hear about.
Well, I wanted to show this really quickly. Like the result of all that is a program that really works. And you can see here, this organization, we scaled up to 2,000 applications over 3 years. We could go a lot faster, but this is just how they happen to roll out the product. But here's kind of the vulnerability discovery curve. You can see they discovered a lot of vulnerabilities over that time. But what's cool is this blue part is the fixed vulnerabilities. So like the remediation is keeping up with the discovery rate, right? There's a little lag, but you can see they fixed 87% of their vulnerabilities. That's huge. And so, we're really excited about that. When you look at MTTR, and I think, everybody should be measuring mean time to remediate. It's one of the best measures of whether your AppSec program has really shifted left. If you're taking a really long time to fix vulnerabilities, then you probably didn't get them to the developer that needed them in time with the right information to get them fixed. So what we've seen is, industry average here, by the way, for static analysis in large enterprises, the average time to fix a vulnerability is 315 days, which is just way too long. That's not a tight feedback loop. That's almost a year. And so this organization has drummed that down to, you can see it's like 50 days for mean remediation here. It's actually, many of our customers are down to 8 days for fixing vulnerabilities, and some are at 1, which is really exciting. So I get excited about MTTR. The other metric you might want to look at is what we call the vulnerability escape rate. This is the rate at which new vulnerabilities are being introduced into development projects. And what we've seen is a dramatic drop from 5 or 6 vulnerabilities a month when people come on board with Contrast. Over the next few months, that rate goes down as they learn to less than 1. And that's really exciting, because if you're producing less than 1 vulnerability per month on your project, that's really easily managed. It's not very expensive to run a AppSec program that way. I would call it a healthy lifestyle, right? And so that's kind of what we aim for, is to help companies drive down their MTTR and vulnerability escape rate till they're healthy.
I totally agree on the MTTR and especially the prevention, right? Because it's not people are going to be able to fix their code and not have to like not burden, but like, take resources from the team. But I really want to, the top right graph there on remediation, some people might go, well, the gap still looks like relatively the same, but when you scale that much, when you add 2,000 apps over 3 years,
That's right.
like your resources, what's happening is you're trying to still use one person to do the same amount of work. And so by keeping that gap closer is like, you normally wouldn't see that. It would just get more and more because you're bringing on more problems.
Yeah, that's right. This gap is mostly like new applications coming online. Every time you do that, it goes up 30 or 40 vulnerabilities, right?
So keeping it close is really important, because if not, yeah, I could imagine that blue being substantially lower in a lot of cases.
Well, if you look at a company using static analysis, you'll see like the blue part is really small. It doesn't go up very quickly. But I really encourage you to look at vulnerability escape rate in your organization. Like, what's the rate of new vulnerabilities coming in? Because if you can drive that down, it really represents learning. It means your developers aren't introducing those same vulnerabilities. And it's obviously much, much more cost effective to prevent a vulnerability from ever existing than it is, even if you find it quickly and fix it and retest it and redeploy. it's still a lot of cost to that. So it's much cheaper to just, prevent that vulnerability from existing because your developers don't do that anymore. And that's what we're seeing after people use contrast for a while.
That is really wild. It just sounds like your tool helps devs learn along the way, like by
Look,
having.
I taught instructor-led classes for a long time, and I think I was a pretty good teacher, but that's why I created WebGoat in the first place, was to teach classes to people. And I don't think it's that effective. I think it's very hard to learn that way because it's always has to be generic to a certain extent, right? Like you can teach somebody about SQL injection, but how much does that really teach them about their environment, like their use of Python in AWS using DynamoDB, uh, you know, with a certain library? Like that's what they need to know. And you're teaching them these generic concepts that they have to then translate to what they're doing. And that translation is really difficult. It's expensive. And so I think giving them, someone called this just-in-time training. And if you give them accurate feedback on the code that they're writing and say, hey, your permission thing should look like this, and copy and paste this in, they're like, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that next time. And like everything changes about how they write code in a secure manner.
Totally. I'm reading a book right now called the Standout Developer, and it's one thing that the author talks about. She says it's one thing to do all these tutorials, but to actually like go get your hands into an open source project or like to learn on the fly and like see these things just gets into your brain a lot faster and just makes you a better dev. So to have a tool along the way that can help you do that as well, it's just not a resource. It's like doing the thing that you kind of need to do. So that
Well,
is
I can't wait to
really
come
well
back and
done.
show you the rest of contrast because there's quite a lot of other things that we should really dig into. But this was a great. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you all about what we're doing in serverless.
All right. So, folks, we are going to have Jeff back to talk more about his other products, and can't wait to see you then, Jeff. So, thank you so much, and see you all next time.
Thanks, everybody.